You know, one of the most powerful things you can do to boost your learning isn't complicated. It's not about buying new gear, downloading the latest productivity app, or even spending more hours with your head buried in a textbook. It's about learning how to focus, deeply and without distraction. See, most people think they're studying when they're really just glancing at notes while checking their phone, opening 10 tabs on their laptop, or flipping between music playlists. That's not real study, that's fragmented attention, and the brain doesn't learn well that way. When we talk about effective learning, what we're really talking about is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire and strengthen its connections. And here's the deal, neuroplasticity doesn't get triggered when you're half in and half out. It gets triggered when you give something your full, undivided attention. That's why focused study sessions, what we might call deep work, are so essential. A focused session means choosing one task, just one, and locking in on it for a set period of time, say 60 to 90 minutes. During that time, your phone is on airplane mode, notifications are off, your environment is as quiet and distraction-free as possible, and your entire cognitive system is aligned in a single direction. This is when the brain starts to encode information more efficiently. It's during these moments that real learning happens. Now, at the neural level, something fascinating is taking place. When you're deeply focused, certain neurochemicals are released in the brain, like norepinephrine and acetylcholine. These act like spotlights, enhancing the signal-to-noise ratio, helping your brain know what to pay attention to and what to ignore. That chemical environment helps stamp in learning. You're not just memorizing facts. You're literally rewiring your brain to understand, integrate, and recall them better. The good news is, you don't need to be in that zone all day. In fact, you can only sustain that level of focus for a limited time. The key is quality, not quantity. 1 or 2 sessions a day of truly deep, focused learning can outperform 5 or 6 hours of distracted, passive review. Think of it like going to the gym. You don't need to be lifting weights all day. But when you do lift, you go hard with intention. The same applies to your brain. There's also something to be said about setting the conditions for this kind of focus. Light plays a role. Getting natural sunlight early in the day primes your brain for better alertness later. Movement helps too. A quick walk or a few minutes of light exercise beforehand can increase dopamine levels, making it easier to sustain attention during your study session. And if you find your mind wandering during a session, because let's be honest, it happens, that's not a failure, that's an opportunity. Gently guide your attention back to the task. Every time you do that, you're not only building focus, you're strengthening the mental muscle of attention. Just like with physical reps, those mental reps count. This approach to focused learning isn't just about academic performance. It's about reclaiming your time and energy. It's about training your brain to be present, to lock in, and to produce results that actually stick. Because at the end of the day, what matters isn't how much time you spend with your books. It's how deeply you engage with them. So next time you sit down to study, treat it like a workout for your mind. Clear your space, set a timer, get into it, and give it your full attention, because that's when the brain starts to change. That's when the learning sticks. That's when you stop studying harder and start studying smarter. One of the most common traps students fall into is cramming. We've all done it, waiting until the last possible moment, staying up late the night before a test, trying to shove as much information into our brains as possible in one sitting. And maybe it works temporarily. Maybe you pass the quiz, but a few days later, that information's gone. You can't recall it when it counts, and it definitely doesn't show up when you're trying to build on that knowledge later. That's because cramming isn't how the brain was designed to learn. The brain learns best not when we force everything in at once, but when we revisit information across time, giving our neural circuits a chance to strengthen and solidify. This is where spaced repetition comes into play. Spaced repetition is simple but incredibly powerful. It's about reviewing information at gradually increasing intervals. You study something once, then you come back to it a day later, then maybe 3 days after that, then a week, and so on. Each time you revisit that material, you're not just refreshing your memory, you're reinforcing the neural pathways that encode that knowledge. Think of it like walking a path in the forest. The more often you walk that path, the clearer it becomes. Eventually, it turns into a well-paved road. That's what you're doing with information in your brain. You're turning weak connections into strong, automatic recall pathways. There's a reason this works so well. The act of forgetting, and then struggling just a little to remember, is actually part of the learning process. When you allow just enough time to pass between reviews, you introduce a bit of challenge, a bit of friction. And that friction tells the brain, this information must be important, let's hold on to it. That's when memory becomes durable, that's when it sticks. Now, this doesn't mean reviewing the same notes over and over again mindlessly. Spaced repetition works best when paired with active recall, actually trying to bring the information to mind without looking. Use flashcards, quiz yourself, or even explain the concept out loud to someone else. Each time you retrieve it from memory, you make that connection stronger, more resilient, and more available when you need it. One of the most efficient ways to structure spaced repetition is to use tools that automate the timing for you. There are apps out there that track what you've learned and when to prompt you to review it again just before you're about to forget. But you don't need fancy software to make this work. Even keeping a simple calendar or study journal where you map out review days can transform how you retain what you're learning. The beauty of this method is that it respects how the brain actually functions. It honors the natural rhythm of learning and forgetting. Instead of fighting against your biology by overloading your system all at once, you're working with it, nudging your brain to keep revisiting the same ideas, each time strengthening the signal. And here's something else that's often overlooked. Spaced repetition saves time. It might feel like more effort upfront because you're spreading your study sessions out, but over the long run, you're reviewing less often than you would if you kept forgetting and relearning the same thing. You're building lasting knowledge instead of constantly starting from scratch. This technique doesn't just help you ace exams, it builds the kind of long-term understanding that you can draw from in future courses, your career, and even your life. The goal isn't to memorize and forget, it's to learn and remember, to build a foundation of knowledge that supports you over time. So when you think about studying, don't think in terms of hours crammed into a single evening. Think in terms of waves, consistent, spaced waves of review that build strength with each pass. It's not about doing more, it's about doing it smarter. Let time do some of the work for you. Let the brain do what it was designed to do. Let the forgetting curve become your secret weapon. If there's one shift you can make that instantly upgrades the way you study, it's this. Stop reviewing passively and start practicing active recall. This one change, as simple as it sounds, can make the difference between information that fades away in hours and knowledge that sticks for years. The problem most students run into is they confuse familiarity with mastery. You read your notes, highlight some lines, maybe even rewrite them neatly, and it feels productive. It feels like you're doing the work. But your brain isn't being challenged, it's just coasting. What really drives learning is effort. Specifically, the effort involved in pulling information out of your brain, not just stuffing it in. That's what active recall is. It's the practice of retrieving knowledge without looking at your notes. You're not rereading, you're asking yourself to remember. That might look like closing the book and writing down everything you can recall, or quizzing yourself with flashcards, or pausing after a section and teaching it out loud, as if you're explaining it to someone else. It feels harder, and that's exactly why it works. There's something important that happens at the neural level when you do this. Each time you retrieve a memory, you're not just accessing it, you're strengthening it. You're reinforcing the synaptic connections that hold that information together. The more effortful the recall, the stronger those connections become. It's like weightlifting for your brain, and the cool part is, You don't need to recall everything perfectly. In fact, struggling to remember something and then correcting it is one of the most powerful learning moments you can have. That process of failure, followed by feedback, actually drives the brain to adapt and remember better next time. This kind of learning can feel uncomfortable at first. We tend to avoid it because it doesn't give us the quick dopamine hit that passive review does. But if your goal is to really know something, to be able to use it, connect it, build on it later, then you need to practice pulling it out of memory. That's the only way to move information from short-term awareness into long-term flexible knowledge. Now here's where this ties into the previous habits. Active recall works best when combined with spaced repetition. So you're not just reviewing something once. You're coming back to it days or even weeks later and testing yourself again. Each recall session adds another layer of reinforcement, making the knowledge more resilient and easier to retrieve when it counts. You're training your brain not just to remember, but to retain and apply. You don't need to overhaul your entire study routine to do this. Just shift your mindset. Instead of asking, "Have I read this enough?" ask, "Can I recall this without looking?" That one question changes everything. Because if you can't recall it now, you won't recall it on test day, and if you can, great. Push a little further. Ask yourself why it matters, how it connects to other ideas, or how you'd explain it in your own words. That's where deep understanding lies. The more you make retrieval part of your daily study routine, the more confident and prepared you become, not just for exams, but for anything that demands your knowledge under pressure. Because when you train your brain to retrieve, you're not just learning to remember, you're learning to perform. One of the most overlooked aspects of effective studying has nothing to do with books, notes, or even study techniques. It has everything to do with timing, specifically, how your brain and body function across the day. There's a rhythm, a natural flow of alertness and focus built into your biology. And when you learn to align your study sessions with that rhythm, your productivity doesn't just improve, it transforms. Your brain isn't operating at the same level every hour of the day. Just like your energy and mood fluctuate, so does your ability to focus and absorb new information. This is largely driven by your circadian rhythm, the internal 24-hour clock that regulates everything from hormone release to body temperature to cognitive performance. If you ignore this rhythm, you end up trying to study during times when your brain isn't optimized for learning. But if you work with it, you can tap into windows of time when your brain is naturally primed to concentrate and retain information more effectively. For most people, the first peak in focus and alertness happens in the late morning, about 90 minutes to 2 hours after waking up. This is when levels of certain neurochemicals, like cortisol and dopamine, rise in a way that supports attention and learning. This is a great window to tackle your most challenging tasks, like working through complex material or doing focused recall sessions. Then there's often a second, slightly lower peak in the late afternoon or early evening, which is still a strong opportunity for productive study, especially if you're reviewing or reinforcing things you learned earlier in the day. The point is, studying randomly, whenever you have a spare moment, isn't nearly as effective as syncing your sessions with these natural peaks. You don't have to be perfect with it, but simply being aware of when you feel most mentally sharp and scheduling your deep focus work during those windows can make a huge difference. You'll find it takes less effort to concentrate, and the quality of what you retain goes up. It's also worth mentioning that your internal clock is sensitive to light, especially natural sunlight. Getting sunlight early in the morning actually sets your circadian rhythm in motion and helps define those periods of focus later in the day. So one of the best things you can do to prepare your brain for learning is to step outside shortly after waking, just for a few minutes. It signals to your brain that the day has started, which helps you feel more awake and alert during your upcoming study sessions. This isn't about rigid scheduling. It's about being intentional. You're working with your biology instead of fighting it. When you do, studying becomes smoother. You're not pushing against brain fog or forcing your way through fatigue. Instead, you're catching the wave of focus when it naturally rises. If you can begin to notice when your mind feels clearest, when distractions fade away more easily, and when you feel genuinely engaged, that's your window. That's when you do the hard work, because that's when it actually sticks. When we think about studying, we often imagine sitting still, locked into a chair, staring at a screen or a book for hours on end. But the truth is, the brain wasn't designed to operate like that. In fact, one of the most powerful ways to boost learning and memory isn't found in the textbook, it's in movement. The simple act of taking breaks and incorporating physical activity can dramatically improve how you retain information, how focused you feel, and how motivated you stay over time. Movement changes your brain state. It increases blood flow, releases dopamine, and helps reset your attention system. When you study for a focused block of time, say 60 or 90 minutes, you're tapping into high concentration circuits, but those circuits fatigue. They need recovery. That's where short breaks and movement come in. A 5-10-minute walk, a stretch, even a few jumping jacks or just standing up and moving around can reset your brain's ability to focus. And when you come back to the material, you're more refreshed, more alert, and more capable of learning. There's also a deeper effect happening here. When you move, especially during breaks between study sessions, you're actually helping to consolidate memory. Physical activity, even light activity, stimulates certain neurochemicals that support the process of memory formation and recall. So you're not just clearing your mind, you're helping to lock in what you just learned. This is why it's important to treat your study sessions like intervals, not marathons. Study with intensity, then recover with intention. Get up, breathe, move, step outside for a few minutes. These aren't wasted moments. They're part of the learning process. They support the rhythm of attention, rest, and reset that the brain needs to function at its best. Another tool that can deepen the benefit of your breaks is non-sleep deep rest. Things like meditation, breathing protocols, or short mindfulness sessions. These techniques help calm your nervous system, reduce cognitive fatigue, and recharge your ability to focus. Even just lying down with your eyes closed and no stimulation for a few minutes can have a measurable impact on mental performance. What we're doing here is respecting how the brain and body actually work. You can't pour focus endlessly from an empty cup. But if you move smartly and rest deliberately, you'll be surprised how much more energy, clarity, and motivation you have to go back in and do the work. There's one part of the learning process that most people completely underestimate. It doesn't happen during your study sessions or while you're reading or even while you're practicing recall. It happens when you're asleep. Sleep isn't just rest. It's part of the actual learning loop. It's the time when your brain takes everything you've studied and starts sorting, filtering, and consolidating it into long-term memory. Without quality sleep, it doesn't matter how hard you study, your brain simply can't hold on to the information. When you sleep, especially during deep sleep and REM sleep, different brain areas become highly active. They replay the patterns of neural activity that were triggered when you were learning. It's like your brain is rehearsing and reinforcing what it experienced while you were awake. This is when short-term memories are transferred into more stable, long-lasting forms. So if you stay up all night cramming, you're actually cutting off the very process that makes learning permanent. The timing of sleep also matters. Getting enough sleep the night after a study session is critical, but so is consistency. Going to bed and waking up at the same time every day helps keep your circadian rhythm stable. And a stable rhythm means more predictable windows for focus, better mood, and more efficient learning. If your sleep is all over the place, your ability to focus and remember things during the day suffers, whether you realize it or not. It's not just about quantity either, it's about quality. Creating a sleep environment that's dark, cool, and quiet makes a big difference. Avoiding bright lights and screens right before bed helps your brain produce the melatonin it needs to fall asleep naturally. Even something as simple as winding down 30 minutes before bed, turning off devices, dimming the lights, doing something calm, and signal to your brain that it's time to shut down and recover. What's really powerful is how sleep connects with everything else we've talked about. When you study with focus, use spaced repetition, practice active recall, and then follow that up with a full night of restful sleep, you lock in what you've learned. You give your brain the full cycle it needs to build knowledge that lasts, rather than information that vanishes a day later. So the next time you're tempted to sacrifice sleep for one more hour of studying, remind yourself that the most effective learning might be happening while you're not even awake. So when we talk about becoming a better learner, it's not just about grinding harder or spending more hours at your desk. It's about aligning your efforts with how your brain actually works. It's about studying smarter, using tools like spaced repetition and active recall, syncing your focus with your internal rhythms, moving and resting to recharge your system, and giving sleep the respect it deserves. When you start making these small shifts, learning stops feeling like a battle and starts becoming something sustainable, even enjoyable. The results won't just show up on your next test. They'll show up in how you think, how you grow, and how confidently you step into the challenges ahead.